Have a holly jolly Christmas, it's the best time of the year. Now I don't know if there'll be snow, but have a cup of cheer. Jolly Christmas, it's the best time of the year. I don't know if there'll be snow, but have
There you go, Nico.
Say hello to friends you know. Oh, the mistletoe is hung where you can see somebody waits for you. This love was for me. Holly jolly Christmas, and in case you didn't hear, oh my God, have a holly jolly Christmas this year.
Get him, Steven, get him, Steven. Great job. That was the best, and that's why you guys had the best performance. But now we're going to go ahead and we're going to give some shout outs to the people that actually sent me pictures of them in pajamas. And we're going to have a contest. You guys are going to vote in the comments. You guys let me know who deserves or who has the best pajamas, and you let me know, and they will win a prize. So here we go. Here are our contestants.
Today I don't feel like doing anything. Just wanna lay in my bed. Feel like picking up my phone, so leave a message tone. Cause today I swear I'm not doing anything. I'm gonna kick my feet up, then stare at the fan. Turn the TV on, throw my hands. Nobody's gonna tell me I can't. Nah, I'll be lounging on the couch, just chilling in my snuggie. Click to MTV so they can teach me how to Dougie. Yeah, so I'm
Juan Skellington.
Oh, yes,
Or is it the one and only Jesus? So those were the participants for today. Thank you guys for sending me those photos. It was really cool. So don't forget, vote for who you think has the best PJs. Just vote for them all, actually, because they all did it and they all deserve a prize. So thank you guys. Alright, so yesterday we talked about the conflict in the West with Tecumseh and the Americans, and how the British were once again giving guns and supplies to these Native Americans. But these Native Americans were really upset that all these new settlers were coming into their land and taking over, because they were saying, we never signed anything, we never agreed to anything, so what are you doing? This is our land still. And how can you take away our land if we never agreed to it? So Tecumseh, he had this idea of unifying all these Native Americans and bringing the Native Americans together to fight against the Americans. They were kind of successful, but then when Tecumseh left, that's when they really attacked. Just like we always talk about, if there's no real true leader, it's easy to take them down, and that's what the Americans did. They took down Tecumseh and these Native Americans, and pretty much it ended the idea that the Native Americans could stand up to the Americans. Today we are going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about this thing called the Warhawks, where these people of Congress call themselves these Warhawks, and how they were saying this is not the Native Americans' fault. This is all the English fault. This is all the British's fault. They're the ones that brainwashed these Native Americans to go and fight against us. They're the ones giving them the supplies. They're the ones doing all this stuff. So it's really British, the Britons or the British, that we need to go to war. But so we're going to talk about this call to war with the Warhawks. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, let's go ahead and review the questions from yesterday. So number one, why did Great Britain want to help the Native Americans along the western frontier? One thing that they wanted to do was they knew that the Native Americans were upset about the Americans coming into their land and kicking them out. So the British, what they wanted to do is they wanted to help the Native Americans along this time, and they hoped to slow the western growth of the United States. They said if we can get the Native Americans to kind of fight them, maybe it'll slow their motivation to go ahead and expand to the west. Number two, who was Tecumseh and what did he want to accomplish? So Tecumseh, he was a Shawnee chief, and he wanted to stop and put an end to these U.S. settlers coming to there. And what he did was he was a really influential Native American leader, and he wanted to unite all the Native Americans against the U.S. settlers and push them off the Native American lands and stand up for their rights and stand up for the land that they owned or they lived on. Number three, what was the Battle of Tippecanoe? So the Battle of Tippecanoe, it was this battle that's pretty much all the Tecumseh's people, the Native Americans, they're fighting against the Americans, and the Americans were pretty much going to attack them and saying, this is crazy, this is out of line, we're going to attack you guys, and we're going to make you guys realize that this is our land and you guys need to go. So this is pretty much when the U.S. defeated Tecumseh and all the followings from the Native Americans, and this kind of ruined the dream of the Native Americans fighting against the U.S. So for today, like I said, we're going to talk about this new call to war, and we're going to talk about how these people that were called the Warhawks, part of the U.S. government, they were kind of insisting that we go to war with Great Britain, because remember, it was not the Native Americans' fault, it was the British's fault. They were the ones giving the Native Americans these ideas, and it's them that we should be mad at, not the Native Americans. So this is what we're going to learn about today. So as the Americans started to look back at the evidence of the war and started to think about the war and reflect on the war, they all started to realize that the British were the ones that were supporting Tecumseh, and they were the ones that pretty much put this bad idea into their minds. So the Democratic Republicans, they thought that the British were the ones who encouraged them, and the Democratic Republicans in the newspaper, remember the newspaper was like their TV or like their social media, they went out and in the newspaper and the headlines, and they read that the war on the Wabash River was purely British, capital B-R-I or T-I-S-H. It was all the British, and the Americans felt that Britain had encouraged Tecumseh to attack the settlers in the West, and we should go after Britain, and this is what we're going to do. We should start a war with Britain, and we got to teach them. They cannot keep messing with us because we defeated them, and every single time they want to do this, this is our country. Just stay out of our business, and we're going after the British. So during this time, several young members of Congress called the Warhawks by their opponents took the lead in calling for war against Britain. So the Congress, they decided we're going to call ourselves the Warhawks, and we're going to go ahead and say we want war. Okay, so these legislators, most of them who were from the South and the West, were led by this guy named Henry Clay, and he was from Kentucky. Another guy that was leading them was this guy named John C. Calhoun, and he was from South Carolina, and Felix Gundy, who was from Tennessee. So a lot of these people from the South and the West thought we should go ahead and go to war with the British. They saw the war as the only answer to British's insults. They said that if we submit, the independence of this nation will be lost. So pretty much saying if we keep letting the British attack us and get these Native Americans so against us, people are going to start to realize that we're not a free country and that we're always going to have to watch our backs against these Native Americans and the British. So they started to convince everybody, saying war is the only answer. War is the only answer. They're going to keep bothering us and bullying us unless we stand up for them and we take them down. The leaders, they also thought that this was important because if we don't put an end to this, the British would keep on influencing the Native Americans and keep putting these bad ideas into them and saying they're going to always keep coming after you until you take them down. The third reason why these Warhawks wanted to do this is because they wanted to invade Canada and gain more land for their settlement. They realized that the British were in Canada, and that if we can extend into Canadian soil, we can get more land and we can make the US even bigger. So we can expand west and we can expand north. Another reason why these Warhawks were calling for war is that they were angered by the British trade restrictions. And the reason why is that they thought those people in the South, they were hurting by this because of the planters and the farmers. Remember, the South were the people that wanted to make money, and a lot of these restrictions that they had were against Britain, and these were their main sources of trade. So let's just get rid of them now. So the Warhawks, they're very passionate about this, and they gave all these speeches, putting things out in the newspaper, and they were urging and encouraging the Americans to stand up to Great Britain. So these reasons right here, they wanted to stop the British influence on the Native Americans, they wanted to invade Canada, and they were angered by the British trade restrictions. These are all some of the main reasons why the Warhawks wanted to go to war against Britain. So with always one side, there's always the other side. So the opposition, the people that were against the Warhawks. The strongest opponents of the Warhawks were New England Federalists, people that were from the North. Like always, like I'm going to tell you, it's always the North versus the South. They can never really get along. Just like now the Democrats and Republicans, they can never see things eye to eye. So the biggest opponents of the Warhawks were these New England Federalists. The British trade restrictions and all this impressment acts had hurt New England's economy, but they did not care about this. They're saying if we keep going and attacking them, then we're never going to make these peace treaties and we're never going to have these friendly business ties with Britain. Just because they did this bad stuff to us, let's work on forgiving them and working out this relationship so we can go back to business as usual. And so instead of fighting, let's go ahead and continue the business with the British because we rely on them and we need them. Other politicians argued that the war with Great Britain would be foolish. They feared that the United States was not ready to fight another fight. Even though the U.S. had beat the British in the American Revolution, the British were still considered a really powerful army, and they were still considered one of the greatest powers in the world at the time. Another thing is that the Americans' army and navy were too small and poorly equipped compared to the British army. They had no supplies. All the supplies that they had, remember, during the American Revolution were pretty much stolen from the British. So the British people had all this army, they had all these supplies, they had the strong military, so there's no way we're going to win this war against Britain. And the last thing was, it was brought by this guy. His name was Senator Obadiah, and he was from New York, and he pleaded with the Warhawks saying that we have to be patient. So instead of going to war right now and just jumping at it because we're angry, we need to be patient and think things through. First, we can't just think about ourselves. We need to think about the country, and we need to think about other people. And this is true to what we have too. A lot of us, maybe we want to jump the gun. We want to not listen to our parents. We want to do what we want to do. But sometimes we just need to be patient and realize that if we're patient and think things out, better things can happen. So this is what the opposition thought about going to war. But we're not powerful enough. Britain's still powerful. We need to work on having a friendly business. We don't have the supplies, and we just need to be patient and think things out. During this time, there was another presidential election, and this time a Republican, James Madison, was elected as president in 1808. And just like what's going on, normally presidents pass on their troubles, Madison had another trouble, and he had to face the difficulty of continuing this unpopular trade war that Jefferson began. So he didn't know what to do. He was thrown in this time where they're trying to influence war, they're trying to work out trade negotiations, and he really didn't know what to do. So he felt the pressure from the Warhawks. He also felt the pressure from the opposing opposition, from the Federalists. And by 1812, he declared that Congress must vote on war. And after speaking to the Congress, Madison, he blasted Great Britain's conduct, and he asked Congress to decide how the nation should respond. Should we go to war or should we not go to war? When Congress voted a few days later, the Warhawks won and decided that we are going to go ahead and go to war. So this is the first time in the nation's brief history that Congress had declared war. So this is the first time that Congress actually said, you know what, we're going to war. So we're going to war. Because remember, the president can only propose something, and Congress is the one that votes and decides if we can go to war. So this is the first time in history that Congress is actually going to decide to go to war. And we are going to go to war, and this war is going to be called the War of 1812. So After Congress declared war, months later, the Americans elected Madison, and he began to serve his term. And pretty much what happened was he is going to become the commander-in-chief. So even though it took them 4 years to decide if we're going to go to war, remember, things take a while. They were patient, so they did listen to the opposition, but they were patient enough, and after they thought about it, they decided, no, war is the answer. We are going to war. So as a quick review, we had this issue that we need to go on. Half the people, the Warhawks, they supported the war, and they thought that we needed to go to war with Britain because Britain was the one that were influencing the Native Americans to attack the U.S. They said that we need to go attack Britain because we need to stand up for ourselves. We're not going to lose our independence, and we need to work out this trade deal with Britain. The opposition, the people of the Federalists, they said, no, we should not be doing this. We should make friendly peace ties with Britain because we rely on them for trade, and they're the ones that supply us money for our economy. And if we were to go to war with them, it would be foolish because we're not as powerful as Britain. We don't have the supplies, and we just need to be patient and weigh out the options. Eventually, when Madison was elected president in 1808, he had this huge, difficult task to decide, are we going to go to war or are we not going to war? Although it took him 4 years, Congress did finally decide that war was the answer, and Congress decides we are going to go to war, which is going to take us into the War of 1812, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So today, you guys are all going to be the president. Carolyn, you still are going to be the first real president, so don't worry. But what you guys are going to do is you're going to write a paragraph or a half sheet of paper reflection, and you're going to tell me, would you have supported going to the war against Great Britain? And you're going to explain yourselves. Try to use at least 3 facts from what you learned, or you can bring in your own reasonings. That would be great, almost like a debate. If we were in school right now, we would have had our second debate, would have broken you guys up into Warhawks and the opposition, and we would have had a debate. But since we can't do that, we're going to do it here. So would you have supported going to the war against Britain? Yes or no? And explain yourself. And if you don't agree with this war, like you're going to agree with the opposition, what other solutions would you propose if you were the president? So what would you do to solve this problem? So that concludes our lesson for today. We talked about the Warhawks and how we're going to go into this new war of 1812. But remember, today you are the president, and I want to see what you guys would have done. Like I said, we would have had a debate, but we just can't do it, unfortunately. But anywho, thanks for those of you who submitted photos to me. Actually, it was probably only Carolyn at the time I made this video. So hopefully you guys submit more tomorrow with Christmas stuff. If you noticed today, the Christmas music was playing and it was bringing back some joy to our lives. But if you have any questions on the homework, feel free to leave me a comment, a message. I'm always here for you guys, and if not, I'll see you guys all tomorrow in our Zoom session at 11 o'clock. Okay? Bye.